Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. We are going to just dive into it today, the second installment of our PC build series. We are going to be talking about the CPUs, or central processing units, today. I have some main points I want to hit. Those points are going to be the main companies, so Intel and AMD, what's the differences between them, what a CPU does, the naming structures of each of the company's CPUs, what threads and cores are, the clock speeds, overclocking, the types of sockets and motherboards you'll need, what APUs are, and what all that means for you when you're buying your CPU. Last time the video was really long. It was a heavy topic of RAM. It's kind of hard to understand. Today I'm going to try and keep this video a little shorter, hopefully a bit shorter, and just kind of hit the main highlights. With CPUs, it's something that's so complex that I'm not sure even I'm really going to understand it with a lot of research. It's just so complex with all the architectures, and it takes teams of people to create these things, and it's kind of hard to understand all of it as just one person unless you're really engrossed in the computer engineering and computer science world. So I'm just going to kind of do a more overview and light-hearted type talk on it today. If you want more specifics, I can try and get some more specifics, but I hope you guys enjoy this, so let's get into it. Alright, so let's get into this. So the two main companies are Intel and AMD. They are pretty much the only ones who create CPUs right now in the industry. Intel is huge, and AMD is kind of rising up to the occasion. For a long time, they were seen as the budget, not as great, but with the rise of the Ryzen CPUs and the Zen and Zen 2 architectures, they have really kind of pushed their way up to the forefront, and with their newest release of the Ryzen 9 3900X, they have really kind of taken the cake, and they're right on par with Intel for just about any workload you need, including gaming. But we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So the two key differences between the Intel and AMD CPUs are the architecture they're run on. So Intel is running the Kaby Lake architecture. They've gone through a huge line of different architectures as time has gone on, with different structures of the CPU itself. But essentially, there's this Kaby Lake, and AMD is now running the Zen 2 architecture, which preceded the Zen Plus, which was really just the Zen architecture with a few tweaks. But essentially, for you as a common consumer, the architecture is going to be pretty minimal, and it's really not going to have too much of a difference on your PC. It's kind of going to be more about the overall performance of the chipset you're looking at. So I don't know if architecture is really going to be a problem for you. I would say it's nice to know, but it's not going to affect your buying necessarily. So the next thing I want to get into is the CPU functions. So essentially, the CPU is going to be the brain of the computer. It's going to be doing all of your processing, and it's going to be utilizing the other pieces of your computer to get those things done. So all of your RAM, your GPUs, and your hard drives, all those are going to be feeding the information to the CPU, and the CPU itself is going to be using that information to give you the performance you are looking for. So without a good CPU, all your other pieces are going to be kind of wasted. Even if you had the top end, 128 gigs of insanely fast RAM, and you have the highest end GPU that you spent $1,000 on. You have tons of solid state drives. If you're tossing in a low end CPU, it's not going to perform to the standards that all your other pieces are. It's just going to be wasting those. So you want to keep your CPU kind of in line with the rest of your components because they all need to work together. And the CPU is really going to be the driving force on really getting the workload done. All right, so moving into the naming structures of each company. Intel, they have a structure based on the kind of grade that the CPU is, and then so I'll just kind of throw up a little bit of a picture with a naming scheme on it, but essentially it's going to be something along the lines of I3579, one of those numbers, and that's going to kind of tell you what performance level it is at. So an i9 being the best, and i3 being the least powerful CPUs in their line, followed by a set of typically 4 numbers. The first number being the generation it is. So currently we're in the 9th generation, so they're all going to be something like an i7 9700. So the 9 being the generation that it's a part of. The next 3 numbers are going to be your SKU. So specific models or smaller components in it are going to change the SKU, which is how you just categorize components within a facility. So the 3 numbers are going to be the SKU, and then they're usually followed by a letter. Typically in the PC building world, it's usually a K for Intel. The K just means that the clock speeds are not locked on the actual CPU, allowing you to overclock in the future. So if you get a non-K version of the CPU, it is going to be capped at the stock speeds that CPU was built at. So next is AMD. AMD has a similar structure. Currently they're in their Ryzen phase. So Ryzen is going to be an R. So R3579, same kind of structure. Followed by a set of typically 4 numbers with usually a letter at the end of it. So their structure just differs a little. The first number is still the generation that is a part of. The second number is where it differs a little bit. This is going to be actually almost a grading performance of how well the actual components are made. So there's something called the silicon lottery, which is the idea that all components are not created equal, and that because there are different kind of grades of materials, as all these things are being made, some are going to be better than others. They test pretty much every single CPU and they almost grade them. So with the most recent idea of this, or representation of this, is with the AMD 3700X and the AMD 3800X. So the 7 and 8 would be the difference between an enthusiast and a high performance kind of grade that they would give the CPU. And it really just allows that the card or the chipset itself is actually a little bit of a higher grade, so therefore they kind of up the price and you get a little bit better performance, a little bit more they call it headroom on overclocking, just more available overclocking ability. This doesn't happen much in like, they don't always do this in lines, but that is something that they have been doing in the past generations, and it's available for them to do. So that's their second number. Their third and fourth number in the set are going to be their SKUs. So that just allows them, if there are small changes in the actual chipset, they can make changes and make another product out of that. And then they typically follow theirs with an X, which, unlike Intel, is not necessarily that it is able to be overclocked, but typically the X's have a boosted clock speed right out of the gate. so you wouldn't necessarily need to do that yourself. But I believe that you can ultimately get pretty much the same performance out of an X and a non-X, as long as you have the comfortability and ability to overclock that yourself. Again, it's going to come back on how well the components were made and that silicon lottery, but it's kind of a gamble. But ultimately, a small overclock on just about any CPU is going to be a small jump in your performance and may be helpful. So cores and threads. Cores are going to be the actual small units within the CPU that do the processing. So the more cores you have, the more total amount of work you're able to do at one given time. The threads are what deliver and or deliver to and from the cores themselves. So any information, data, whatever it is going to be using those threads to go back and forth between the CPU and whatever components are needed in those times, or if you're using your storage memory or whatever it is, it'll be running through the threads. So the more threads you have, the faster the cores themselves are able to get and deliver information. So it is important to have both more cores and more threads at the same time. That's really all you need to understand about that. You can go into so much more depth with cores and threads, but essentially you just want more cores, more threads. So next I want to talk about overclocking. I have never overclocked myself, and it is something I will be getting into on this channel. I'm really looking into what components I'm going to be able to get and overclock and see exactly what kind of performance I can get out of it. And I'll be posting a video of not only how I do it, but as I'm learning how and the process and what I need to know, I'm going to kind of give an informational kind of guide on that as well. So for now, I'm just going to kind of leave overclocking as a smaller piece, and just know that you are able to, on AMD cards and Intel K cards, you are able to change the clock speeds that they run at. And real quick, clock speeds are very similar to how they were in the RAM. It is a cycle, and with CPUs, they're measured in gigahertz. So if you've seen it, you'll see that like a lot of them run at 3.8 gigahertz. So this is 3.8 billion clocks per second. So the higher that number goes, the more clock cycles are able to go within 1 second, meaning more information or more data is being able to process per second. So being able to overclock and push that clock speed up means that per second you are able to do more work at any given time. So that's why overclocking is such a big component of PC building, is because you are able to push the maximum performance out of your CPU that may not be there as the card is delivered. So next thing to talk about is the motherboard and the chip slots. So Intel and AMD use different types of slots for their CPUs to go into. The current Intel is the LGA 1151, which is basically that there's pins on the socket itself, and then the chip lays onto the pins, and then that gives the connection. Whereas with AMD, they have the AM4 socket currently, and the pins are actually on the CPU itself, and then that goes within the chipset and connects on the inside of the motherboard. All that really translates to for you is knowing that the motherboard that you choose needs to be specific to the CPU you choose. All right, before we end here, I just wanted to kind of touch on what APUs are. So APUs are an integrated graphics CPU. So there is a small additional chip in there that is running an integrated graphics. This is really nice for either extremely small builds where you don't have room for a graphics card outside of it, or if you are looking for just kind of a small workstation that you don't need graphics or high-end graphics cards for. They are not as common, but some of the mid-tier or lower range of AMD cards do have the option to get APUs, so they have integrated graphics, allowing you to do either really light workloads or some really light kind of indie game or older game gaming. That's what APUs are really going to be used for. All right. Lastly, I kind of want to just bring it all together and say what you're doing with your PC is really going to be the largest component when you're looking at CPUs. Decide right from the beginning what you are going to be doing on your computer. If you're going to be just straight up gaming, you might want to lean towards an Intel chipset. They just, for most mid-tier chips, they have a better gaming performance compared to the AMDs. They may be a little pricier, but if you're willing to go that route, you can. If you're going to be doing some other workloads, maybe editing or something like that, AMD really does have a good breadth of workloads, so they can game just fine and they do really well, especially with this new Ryzen 3. But they also do really well extremely well in editing and rendering and those types of workloads, and it allows for them to really excel in that area. So deciding on what you are going to be doing and at what level. If you're doing 4K video editing, you're really going to want to go high-end AMD chipsets. If you're doing 4K gaming, you might really want to get into that Intel i9 area where it's the high-end gaming performance. So just deciding what you're going to be doing is going to be the most important thing. So I'd say for most people mid-level, i5s or R5s are going to be super good. Really, that's going to be enough computer for most people. If you're moving up in either field, workloads or gaming, going up to an i7, that's probably going to be covering almost everyone. And then if you're really, really getting into, the high end levels of things, the i9 and the R9 are going to be the top of the top, the best stuff. But you are going to pay for it. So it's kind of up to you where your price is and what your workload really looks like. So that's going to be kind of the determining factor for you. All right, so that is where I'm going to leave this episode. Tune in for the next one. Share this around, guys. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you feel inclined. Thank you for sitting through this, and peace.